these are all questions that arise when we market and we develop the audience for a sport and we want to do it in natural settings. And how are we going to balance all these different competing impulses that people have about what that sport should look like?
Welcome to Trail Effect. I am your host, Josh Blum. Trail Effect is a show that dives into the stories behind trails, the communities that embrace trails, and the people who rely on trails as a way of life. The goal of this show is to turn the stories you will hear from our guests into useful knowledge that can be applied to your community while providing some entertaining and inspirational content. Guests on Trail Effect include trail builders, board members, community leaders, volunteers, and regular people who really enjoy trails. For episode 206, I'm joined by Mark Eller from Leave No Trace. This might sound like a straightforward conversation. It isn't. Mark is a veteran of the outdoor industry with more than a decade at IMBA during a period of major program expansion. And he continues his work today at Leave No Trace. His background includes climbing, mountain biking, and decades of time spent in the outdoors. This episode sits at the intersection of marketing, mountain biking, trails, and how we show up in the outdoors in ways that are practical and low impact. To be completely honest, this conversation caught me off guard, and I learned more than I expected while producing it. Mark is a great conversationalist, and the detail he added during this show is second to none. This is the final episode for 2025. Spotify's Rap for Creators highlighted a couple stats that really stood out to me, and this is entirely because of you listening and sharing the show. For 2025, new audience growth increased by 182%, and the Trail Effect ranked higher than 95% of all podcasts when it comes to being shared with others. Listening and sharing are the things that keep the show going, and I really appreciate it more than you know. The Outdoor Marketing Bootcamp is where outdoor brands, organizations, and trail builders get real about marketing. On February 17th and 18th, 2026, join a 2-day virtual training with top outdoor marketing pros like Jed Gunn from Truck Bikes, Mark Eller from Leave No Trace, and many others who know how to get your message heard. You'll learn story frameworks, audience strategies, and grant-winning tactics tailored to the outdoor world. If you want your marketing to work as hard as the projects you are building, this bootcamp is for you. You can check it out at www.outdoormarketingbootcamp.com or hit the link in the show notes. Now on to the Trail Effect with Mark Eller and Leave No Trace. Here we are today on Trail Effect. I've got Mark Eller. Mark is the Director of Membership and Communications at Leave No Trace. But prior to working at Leave No Trace, Mark spent a good 10 years or so working at IMBA and has, from what I could tell, spent his whole professional career working in the outdoor space in one capacity or another. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, except for my brief stint as a high school English teacher right out of college. But from there, it was pretty much a lot of outdoor sports, recreation. That's been the field I've been in, chasing the big bucks, basically.
Well, chasing the big bucks. You just caught me at that one. Let's dig into your prior work and what led you into going to work at IMBA, because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and it looked like you were at Ski Racing Magazine and even worked for a vegetarian magazine. Yeah.
Print magazines were where I thought I was going to spend my career. And as we all know, the internet came along and threw a pretty massive wrench into what print magazines once were. But it was great to be doing print kind of in the glory days of the 90s and the early 2000s. And one day I was working at Ski Racing and somebody said, "Hey, could you post all the ski results from the weekend on our website?" And I was like, "Our website? We have one?" And then, things shifted and I realized that it might be good to look around for options outside of print magazine work. And I ended up doing communications and marketing work for International Mountain Bike Association for 10, 11 years. So that was my transition from print journalism into nonprofit work. And now I'm at Leave No Trace and I've been here. That was my follow-up from the IMBA work, landing at Leave No Trace.
So what compelled you to go work at IMBA from a personal perspective? Were you mountain biking prior to going to IMBA?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I've always been an endurance athlete as well as having a rock climbing habit. But, I raced road bikes back in the early 90s, right after I finished a collegiate rowing career. And I was looking for something like racing, sport thing to do. So I raced some road bikes and then started getting on knobby tires. And by the time I had evolved through all of that and started working for IMBA, I had done probably more road racing than mountain biking, but I'm always game for anything where you put on a bib and see who can cross a line first.
Working at IMBA, you were in there kind of when a bunch of different initiatives really launched. And I'm going to say you were in there during the launch of the Ride Center, the launch of Trail Solutions as a business entity, not the book, because I think you would have came in just after the book, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, actually, a big part of how I got to IMBA was that Pete Weber was running marketing communications and he wanted to take a year sabbatical to follow up on the Trail Solutions book and to write the Managing Mountain Bike book. So we kind of knew each other here in Boulder, and I was looking for something new. And Pete said, "Why don't you try communications at IMBA, and I'll take a year away from the office to write our next book." So those two books really had a big effect on how I got into working for IMBA.
What did you see once those books were launched, and how even today you'll see sketches from from the original IMBA Trail Solutions book as how trails should be built in trail contracts that go out to bid?
Yeah.
Did you foresee that kind of impact from that book and the impact that it had on shaping, I'm going to say, the modern trail world?
I don't think I knew the professional trail building and land manager side of things as much as I knew the recreation side of mountain biking in those early days. But I knew Pete, or I got to know Pete, and I realized that this is not a guy who does things halfway. So it did not surprise me when I saw that land managers were adopting the standards as published in those books at a pretty, bureaucratic level. Like they took our word for it, IMBA's word for it, that this was in fact the right way to design and build trails, because it was so thoroughly documented in those books. And it was not surprising to see land managers adopt that as a standard.
So that was back, we're going to say 20 plus years ago. Mountain biking as a whole, we can probably date it as being around 40 or so years old. So yeah. In mountain biking, when it first, became a thing, and one of the reasons why IMBA became a thing was to just get land managers to accept that bikes are good, on trails or on dirt, right? How is it to see that land managers not only accepted that mountain bikes are good to be on dirt, but they're taking what mountain bikers are bringing to the table in terms of proper trail design, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, it's been an continuing adventure, I would say. It was really cool to work at IMBA and get to know some of the founders of the organization. And I think there was a lot of excitement about the fact that people finally were picking up on the idea that bikes could be on trails and the world wouldn't burst into flames and wilderness wouldn't implode and things like that. So, I think even within the mountain bike community and the founders of IMBA, there was an interesting dynamic of questioning how legitimate this all would be and how far it would go. But also a lot of emphasis, and this is something that has continued through my work at Leave No Trace, on really working with professionals from different fields, including scientists, biologists, engineers, and getting buy-in and input from people who didn't necessarily have a horse in the field for as far as wanting to get bikes everywhere, but just wanted to see quality research and understanding go into the advice that IMBA was going to publish. And, Dr. Jeff Marion is one of the founders of Leave No Trace, one of the influencers of IMBA's books. And that kind of research level science that goes into saying we really firmly believe that these trails can be built at these standards with minimal impact to the natural world was very gratifying to see that there was that it was not all just rah, rah, we want to ride our bikes everywhere. It was also like, here's why we think that this can be done in a sustainable fashion.
One of the initiatives with IMBA during your time there would be the IMBA Ride Centers. And I recently just posted a show about the relaunch of IMBA Ride Centers. What are your thoughts on that concept from the beginning? I've always thought it was a great concept, but you were there when it hit the ground the first time, right?
Yep. Yeah, it was fun to work on that concept. And I think the really important thing there is that we can talk about all the wonderful ideas of sustainability and just fun trail design. But until you have real world examples to showcase those things, they can seem pretty esoteric. The pages of Trail Solutions or mountain biking, managing mountain biking books are one thing, but then when you can actually see it executed in the real world, see how people react to it and how well it can be integrated into communities so that the ride centers are a positive for not just the riding community, but communities on a lot of levels, small businesses, youth programs, fitting into the conservation vision for a community. And it's really great to see ride centers exemplifying those things in real world scenarios instead of like white papers or books or things like that.
Yeah. The ride center thing is, I think, extremely important because it really does help give a community an identity around being a good trail community. With that, you also were around for the launch of what I believe was the regional director program.
Yeah.
Which I think, again, is another hugely successful program under IMBA during its time. And I was actually been friends with a couple of the regional directors, one of them being Hansi Johnson.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that whole program and what that kind of did for bring IMBA up another level?
Well, I would say that it was ambitious. It remains ambitious. It's, funding a full-time bike advocate in multiple regions of the country is easier said than done. And we lived through that. It was challenging. It became impossible for a while when our major sponsor, Subaru, who had done so much for mountain biking in North America, but wasn't able to continue the program the way it was originally budgeted for. So I think it is visionary and ambitious to say that we're going to pay for full-time mountain bike advocates in various parts of the country, but definitely was and probably continues to be worth a try.
For sure. I mean, I just brought up Hansi, and Hansi obviously is from the upper Midwest, and you could see the impact that he, maybe loosely had, because he definitely wasn't the only person. There's been a lot of people, but you could see the impact of what that program may have brought to, we'll say, northern Minnesota, right?
Sure.
There's various IMBA ride centers between Duluth, Cuyuna, Tioga, Redhead, Giants Ridge, like all the places, right?
Yeah.
And he's still involved today to a certain degree.
Yeah, for sure. I think Hansi continues to do amazing things for human powered recreation in the upper Midwest. I don't know if he's advocated for developing power sport facilities too, but I know Hansi to be, a conservationist, a recreationist, and we're all trying to figure out ways to mesh that with sustainable business models. I mean, when we talk about sustainability for these different organizations that I've worked for, the economics sustainability part is probably the part that people want to talk about last. But we all know that you have to have a vision for who's going to pay for all this stuff for it to have lasting effects in the real world. So that's tightrope we all walk. I think it's an interesting discussion for the regional directors program at IMBA. How much of that should be paid for directly from that region with the resources available there? To what degree kind of national organization and a national sponsor take the lead or fill in the gaps? I mean, those kinds of like, how are we going to get all this stuff paid for questions are really primary to continuing a lot of the successes that I think we've seen work well in places, but never been easy to figure out exactly how are you going to economically sustain those visions.
Yeah, and with that, you brought up Subaru as a sponsor, and Subaru was obviously the main sponsor behind the IMBA Trail Care Crew, which I think arguably might be the most impactful program that IMBA ever rolled out, because it really brought trail building standards right front and center to people's, like literally to their front doors, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's been a huge legacy of success. So I'll mention this part. This is something I tell people, kind of whisper it into their ear sometimes, that IMBA and my current employer, Leave No Trace, and also the Access Fund, the Climber Coalition, all shared an office way back when. And they all basically rolled out the same model of recreation and conservation and bringing it into the field with a Subaru paid for traveling educator program. So all three have had that same model, and it's in all cases, I think, been super effective. There's a reason why all three organizations have been around for 30 plus years, is that connection with communities and bringing educators into people's backyards and showing them the standard for trail design or climbing crag management, or just reducing impacts, like as Leave No Trace does, having people out in the field and living the life. And they're kind of like the rock stars of our movement, living out of Subarus. It's been going on for multiple decades now. And Subaru has a tremendous legacy to be proud of how many places they've affected with these traveling educator programs.
For sure. And if I'm not mistaken, Leave No Trace actually still has a kind of a model like that going today, right?
We do. Yeah, we have a traveling educator team, but we're also investing a lot in online education. Obviously, there are some downsides to, well, driving internal combustion engines around and trying to reach people just by driving to them. So I think marrying that education, where you can have it both on your screen on your computer or in person with a traveling team, gives us the capacity to reach a lot more people. And the books were the same way for IMBA, right? Like, you didn't necessarily have to have a trail care crew there to teach you about trail design. It would be great when they could do that, and you could also look at it in the book. But, we were always looking and continue to look for how we spread the word and educate people about best practices. That's what has been fun for me, because I've always loved outdoor recreation. I've always wanted it to be compatible with conservation. And those educators that have gone all over North America at this point have had a huge impact on a lot of communities.
Kettle Mountain Apparel has fall and winter gear dialed. Cold is creeping in, and if you plan to keep getting outside, you'll need layers that actually pull their weight. Kettle delivers with solid base layers, dependable outerwear, and no-nonsense designs that handle real weather. Hit the link in the show notes or on the Trail Effect website when you place your next Kettle Mountain order, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Venture far and laugh hard. So switching to marketing, and this might be extremely hard to answer for a question or something to talk about, which is, from a marketing perspective, where are some things that we've maybe gotten right and wrong? And I say that with, it's really easy to market a product, we'll say bikes or the new dropper post or whatever, but marketing trails and the infrastructure that is necessary to use those products has never been able to gain the same amount of traction as the products themselves. Where do you think we could do better, and where are some places that we maybe went sideways in those arenas?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it comes down to what your vision is for how widely, people talk a lot about wanting to grow the sport, right? That's a phrase that you hear people say. And I was just saying to somebody the other day, kind of be careful what you wish for when you're talking about growing your sport. Climbing is a good example. Climbing was pretty niche when I started it into climbing back in the early 80s. And people would say wistfully, someday this will be an Olympic sport, and someday you'll be able to climb anywhere in the country. And now we have all those things, and there's a lot of people grousing about, like, it's too popular, the crags are too crowded. And it was so great back in the day when hardly anybody knew about it. And, truthfully, flying under the radar has a lot of good things about it, in terms of, like, nobody really cares about your access if you're doing a sport that's so small that it has basically no impacts. When you start to grow a sport, a lot of bigger questions, harder questions come up. And marketers are, rightfully asked, like, why are you trying to make this into the biggest thing in the world? Wouldn't it be better if we didn't tell everybody? But I guess I've always had the impulse at the end of the day with those things that it shouldn't be, if climbing and mountain biking and being outside have been so wonderful for me, why shouldn't they be so wonderful for other people too? And there's got to be a way to bring people into these outdoor sports, give them a good conservation ethic to work from, and let lots of people enjoy the wonderful things about being outside, challenging yourself, sharing with others, sharing experiences with others. So marketers have to, I think, walk that line of like, if we're going to grow a sport, if you're being charged with like bringing a lot of people and money and interest to a particular segment of outdoor sports, how are you going to do that in a responsible, sustainable fashion?
So I am not a climber. So this next question may be a little off base, and with that, climbing has squarely been popping on my radar a lot recently, especially because last week I was in Fayetteville, West Virginia. I think there might be some rock climbing there, right?
That's a good place to go. Yeah. The New River Gorge.
Yeah. And I happened to stay at a hostel that was, marketed to climbers.
Yeah.
But with that, climbing, like you said, climbing has gotten popular. It is in the Olympics now. And do you feel that with climbing and the popularity of it, having things such as climbing gyms become such a popular aspect of the sport, do you think that has kind of helped get people into it, but also lessen the impact of outdoor climbing versus, we're going to say, manufactured gym climbing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a lot of positive things that come from people who learn to climb in a gym, and people are going to want to climb on rock as well. But first of all, physically and just the sports side of things, people get so good so quickly. There were no climbing gyms when I was a 13, 14-year-old climber in Washington, D.C. area, going to the local crags. It took me like 3 years to climb 510, and kids here in Boulder, Colorado climb 510 in their first 3 weeks in the gym. And it's like, they get really good. They're going to want to climb outside, and hopefully there's just going to be people around. I know there are who say, great, let's get you out to a crag. Let's use some of these physical skills you've learned in the gym. But let's also remember we're in nature. We're not in a gym. And let's figure out how to climb outside in a way that's going to keep that natural feel. It's a challenge because, people get excited about their sports, and, mountain biking goes through this. There are people that want to have as many radical trails and as many places as possible, and don't want to hear that there are ups and downs to consider when you're developing a trail in a natural area. To where's the balance between the really emphasizing the recreation side? Where's the aspects that you want to keep a naturalistic feel to? Not every trail should and can feel like a challenge for a very expert level rider without affecting other people, without infecting the natural environment. 20-foot gap jump is not a naturally occurring thing. So where are you going to put that jump, and where are you going to have a trail that feels like it's more part of a natural landscape? These are all questions that arise when we market and we develop the audience for a sport, and we want to do it in natural settings. And how are we going to balance all these different competing impulses that people have about what that sport should look like?
An interesting observation that's came up to me, I guess, for many, many years now, but I think it's still common among people that don't mountain bike, which is when the average person that, isn't involved with mountain biking thinks of mountain biking, they often think of Red Bull Rampage or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Right. But when you take another sport that's, we're going to say, a good half a century older than mountain biking, like skiing.
Yeah.
I don't know if people think of backcountry style skiing and skiing competitions similar to that of Red Bull Rampage when they think of skiers, or skiing, because it's older and more normalized. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really valid comparison, I think, because, a ski resort is a pretty intensive use of natural features becoming a recreation focused playground. And you just get used to certain constructs, right? Like, okay, this mountain's got chairlifts all over it and the bases that, all that stuff that goes into a resort. You really step away from a natural backcountry feel. Obviously, that's not the point. And I think for people who are used to going to resorts, that just seems totally natural. Other people who ski backcountry are a smaller group of people saying, like, that's not the only way to do it. You don't need to have a moving couch take you to the top of the mountain every time. But it's interesting how we just sort of get embedded ideas in our, and mountain biking and bike parks. Like, that was a really radical concept 25, 30 years ago. The idea that you would devote a public park to a group of riders and then build wall rides and jumps and non-natural looking elements all over it was really off-putting to a lot of people. So yeah, we just need to figure out where we're going to do these very recreation intensive facilities, I think, and how those are going to resemble in some ways the more nature-based experiences that a lot of people also have in mind as an ideal for their sport.
Is that a natural segue into Leave No Trace?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, it's interesting with Leave No Trace in that I still get to talk about a lot of these same things. I don't do it from a single sport perspective, but there are a lot of people who participate in Leave No Trace activities or teach Leave No Trace that are also part of the outdoor sports world and have that side to them. But then again, there's a big part of this audience that has no interest in competitive sports and is really, really close to the conservation side. And I try to always tear down those walls that people want to put up of like, well, recreation and conservation are antagonistic. I don't think they have to be, but Leave No Trace is obviously not a single sport, not focused on promoting a particular recreation activity as much as giving people a framework for how to be outside in any context and minimize their impacts to nature.
Let's go into the backstory of Leave No Trace and what Leave No Trace is from a high level, just to kind of bring everyone up to speed with, your work today, but really what the organization stands for.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because it's easy to assume that everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say the phrase Leave No Trace, and not everybody knows that there's an organization that works to maintain it. But I'll give you the backstory quickly and talk about what Leave No Trace does today. It was originally a conservation program within the National Park Service, the U.S. National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service. And it was very focused on wilderness, people who were going into designated wilderness. And those agencies felt like people needed guidelines for how to be in wilderness with really maintaining that very nature-based experience. So they started developing an education program called Leave No Trace. It became very popular. The phrase resonated with people. And flash forward 30 years later, they had decided let's enable a nonprofit to maintain the Leave No Trace education and themes. And so that's the Leave No Trace that I work for today. And we're much less focused on just wilderness. There's Leave No Trace programs that we talk about for your local park, for things that you do in your home life. It's the idea that being in nature inspires us to want to protect the planet and to be conservation minded. And we've taken what was a wilderness facing program and made it as broadly facing as possible with the 7 principles of Leave No Trace that give people just a framework for being outside and having the least effect possible on the natural world while trying to remain not too holier than thou or preachy about it all.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it at the most basic level of like, just kind of take personal responsibility for what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And to think about like, what are like just if the basics? If I just did these things, like this would pretty much I think if you follow the 7 principles of leave no trace, you can feel pretty confident that you're being outside and you're doing a good job of not inflicting your recreation experience on wildlife or natural landscapes to a degree where it's destructive.
So I'm going to cheat, but I'm going to list those 7 principles and let you kind of dive into them if you want to. I have them open in another screen because I don't have it memorized.
Yeah. And I always say, like, I try not to just rattle them off and to make it sound like the important part of leave no trace is being able to quote the 7 principles verbatim off the top of your head. I think, like you just said, if you are operating from this place of like, I want to respect the natural world, there's a lot that you can figure out on your own, but there are also some things where I'll give you an example would be like principle 4 of leaving what you find in nature. That's not an easy concept for anybody, I think, to figure out, well, why shouldn't I just take this rock or this plant or this piece of driftwood home with me? It takes a little bit of thinking and maybe some advice from others to think like, oh, well, what lives underneath that rock, or what's going to be missing? How am I depriving somebody else of a natural experience if I'm collecting things and bringing them home? So the principles and all that advice gives you sort of a framework that's pretty comprehensive and isn't necessarily stuff that you'd always think of on your own. So seeing that advice from others is a good way to sort of check yourself of like, what are all the things that I could be doing that could be detrimental, and how do I make sure I'm minimizing those detrimental effects?
So this idea just popped into my head now. Okay, so this might work, this might not. I'm going to list a principle, and then maybe you could come back with a very brief statement of what that actually means.
Okay.
So let's play a game. Principle 1, plan ahead and prepare.
Yeah. I mean, definitely the parent principle, I would say that's probably the biggest one. And the thing I always think about with that principle is that a lot of destructive behavior in the outdoors is from being underprepared. I always think of like people going to a campsite and they didn't really check the weather forecast and everybody's getting cold. And we've all seen this where everybody just like tramps into the woods and starts grabbing whatever combustible substance they can find and tossing it into the fire because people didn't think like, well, maybe we should make sure that we have enough warm clothes or we have firewood from a sustainable source. And instead they start stripping trees and whacking away with hatchets for no good reason other than they didn't plan ahead and prepare. So that lack of preparation leads to destructive behavior that probably wouldn't happen with better preparation.
So principle 2, which might actually be my most favorite principle, travel and camp on durable surfaces.
Yeah, well, it's a good one for a bike-focused crowd, right? And one of the cool things about bikes is that they tend to stay on the trail. You know, anybody who's ridden off trail very far is like, well, this is a drag. I want to get back on the trail as soon as I can. So that's a good thing to point out when we're talking about like why mountain biking is a conservation-minded sport in large part. Bikes stick to the trail. And I always, bring that up. It's actually foot travelers and equestrians are more prone to get off that established narrow band of single track and trample things more easily than bikes do.
That reminds me of one time I was in the woods with my local trail organization, the local conservation nonprofit, and a property owner who had a conservation easement on their property. And the owners of the property that had the conservation easement brought up during this meeting, because we were talking about building an additional trail on their property and needed permission from all these people. And the question was, how do you keep the bikers in and the hikers out? And I didn't really understand the premise of the question. So I said, well, what do you mean? And the response from the property owner was, well, the bikers, they just stay in the trail. The hikers, they're always lost and always ending up at our back door, or tree stands are getting stolen, or whatever the case is, right? And I don't want to pin mountain bikers against hikers, but what you just said reminded me of that story.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've all got our ups and downs, right? Like every recreation group is, at the end of the day, we're all extractive users, as one of my old IMBA friends likes to say. It's a question of how you can be extractive in the least damaging ways possible.
Principle 3, dispose of waste properly. This one probably annoys me the most going outside. And I'm going to maybe bring up the most annoying annoyance, which is people bagging their dog's feces and then leaving it on the side of the trail. Drives me nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. It is hard to get your head around sometime. And it's another one, like, go back to principle 1. Do you even have a way to carry the dog poop out with you that you're comfortable with? Like, it's easy if you've got a designated fanny pack or backpack with a compartment that you're comfortable dropping your bagged dog waste into. If you don't have the dog waste bag and you don't have a way to carry it, it becomes very tempting to be like, well, I'll just put it over here by the side of the trail, and I hope I'll remember to get it on the way back out, but I don't actually really plan to do that. All those things come from not having a plan. Okay, I know my dog's likely to poop while we're out here, and am I actually truly prepared to deal with that, or am I going to just like hope she doesn't today?
Principle 4, leave what you find. You already kind of gone into a story about that. Maybe you could still make one more statement on the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one, like with my kids, I wrestle with. I think we've all taken things out of natural areas because we found it like incredibly cool. You found this little rock with a hole in it or something. But just understanding, and like we were saying before, the intention of thinking through what I want my impacts to the natural world to be, without just assuming like, oh, I'm gonna bring this plant out with me and identify it back at home. Like, well, what if I just took a picture of it instead? You know, that old scouting mantra of taking only pictures there's a reason why that's hung around as long as it has.
We're going to tangent because something just popped into my brain of like a positive of cameras being in your pocket with apps, which is like having an app on your phone that identifies what that plant is in the field by just taking a picture of it.
Yeah. Yeah, technology's got great possibilities to help us with these kinds of things. And I think that's a good example.
Principle number 5, minimize campfire impacts. I mean, that's probably a given, but still some people don't understand where that could go.
For sure. And I think I've become even more aware of it. I mean, I felt like I did understand that. I grew up with like hippie backpacking parents, and we would try to do a good job. I've become even more adamant, I would say, about thoroughly dousing fires to where you can put your hand directly into the coals before you walk away. Because we all know the destructiveness of wildfire is like pretty much everything else we're talking about pales in comparison to when somebody blows it on Principle 5, we're talking about just destruction at a scale that's really horrible to contemplate.
Principle number 6, which is probably another one that some people wrestle with, but at the same time is probably fairly easy to follow, which is respect wildlife.
Yeah. Have you heard the thumb trick? This is one I didn't know before I started working at Leave No Trace. It's a cool one. Idea is that you extend your arm in front of your face and you hold up your thumb. And if the wildlife you're viewing isn't thoroughly obscured by your thumb, you're probably standing too close to the wildlife for their safety and yours. So using the thumb trick is a fun little, easy to teach. And again, like, I think it's less important to be like rigidly adhering to the thumb rule. Different wildlife have different reactions to people, but it's a way to give people a tool in their toolkit to be like, I should think about how I'm interacting with wildlife, not just what that wildlife could do to me, but what I could be doing to it as we're observing each other.
Yeah, for sure. And then principle number 7, be considerate to others, which could also bleed back into principle number 6, because others could be that wildlife.
Right. Yeah. But mountain bikers, I think, have been really whacked over the head with those kinds of, are you considerate? Are other people being considerate to you? Things like the yield triangle, which both Leave No Trace and IMBA seem to claim that they invented. Those questions of interactions with other people in nature are super important, have big impacts on what we think of as responsible outdoor use. And it's definitely got to be addressed.
One thing I didn't see coming, and I was a little bit resistant to using one until I'm like, well, I might as well try this to see if it works, is a product. And this is a specific product called the Timber Bell, which is a bell. It's like a bear bell, but you can turn it on and off. And I was like, that's going to be super annoying in the woods. People aren't going to want to hear it. And then I put one on my bike, and we're talking about in an area we're going to say more urban trails. So there's a lot of use in general.
Yep.
And I have never been thanked so many times by hikers as I am when I have that Timber Bell on. It blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I always emphasize, I did this at IMBA too. And I tried to even, I remember the fraught days of trying to rewrite some of the language around user guidelines at IMBA, because, these things tend to become enshrined. But I've always emphasized that the most important thing is to be friendly in how you approach another trail user, and to smile. And whether you're going to use a bell or a verbal command, or I guess command is what I'm trying to get away from, a verbal exchange with other people, like the intent of being friendly comes across no matter what mechanism you're using. You can be obnoxious with a bell if you like ride up behind somebody and ring it super loud from 3 feet behind them, or you can be very welcoming with your bell use and ring it, from far enough back that it doesn't startle anybody. And then you get that appreciative response of like, oh, great. It was great to know you were coming, and give me a chance to find a place to let you pass.
Yeah. And that's the exact thing that I find with the Timber Bell, is that it's the noise isn't super annoying, but it lets people know far enough in advance versus just riding up right behind them and starting to ding a bell.
Yeah.
On how it works good. And then if you're in a place where, you're not going to see another hiker, say it's a mountain bike specific trail, you can shut the thing off.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, that's a great tool. And it's the kind of thing where I think that's what I'm trying to say. That intention of wanting to have a friendly pass on the trail is very different than the command on your left from in a loud voice from 10 feet behind you. It's going to get a very different reaction.
Unless, of course, you're in the middle of a race and that person you're trying to pass is another racer, and that might also incite some different stuff, but still kind of funny.
Yeah. I was always, as a mountain bike racer, way better going up a hill than going down it. And I have had plenty of people frustrated behind me, yelling at me to get over. And I am like, I will, but I'm not jumping into the ditch for you. And if you want to stay ahead of me, you better go hard up the hill too.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. So training is a large part of Leave No Trace. Let's talk about some of the training programs that you guys do. I believe there's, you have some videos online and whatnot, but kind of talk about how that is an important part of Leave No Trace as an organization.
Yeah, like I said, I think the online training that we've really launched into has been tremendously successful. I think we said we've had more than 1 million lessons served online. More than 25,000 people have obtained a Leave No Trace certificate from taking our 101 course. The courses are available in 6 different languages. So, compare that type of volume of awareness of Leave No Trace compared to driving around campsite to campsite in a Subaru and teaching it to small groups of communities. You can see that the one experience is great because you're right there and you're learning it from the experts in the flesh, but giving people the option to learn about it. And then IMBA can say certainly the same things with their in-person trainings, but then those books that have had huge effects on people. I'd be surprised if IMBA doesn't already have or isn't developing online learning modules, because we all know that this is just a great way to reach a volume of people. And that's a big question as a marketer and a communicator for these different movements, is like, how are you going to get it in front of enough people that it actually has a measurable effect on natural areas, on development of trail systems? There's only so much you can do with in-person education, it feels like.
For sure. With Leave No Trace, is there, and I'm sure this has been on your radar a lot, maybe not, but is there a common misconception that people have about Leave No Trace?
There are many. It's funny, Leave No Trace has been around for a long enough time, and it's got kind of a dispersed enough like origin story. So I went out to Google's offices in Sunnyvale a few years ago for a conference about online learning and app-based learning systems, and it was great. There were a lot of super smart people there, obviously, but some of the Googlers, the younger ones, were big Burning Man fans, and these burners were saying, "Oh, you're from Leave No Trace, like Burning Man invented that." And I was like, "No, you're. It's great that you're using it, and the phrase is still alive in burner culture, but not in fact the." Scouts think they invented Leave No Trace. Obviously, the Forest Service and the National Park Service have some of the biggest claims to it, but it's become a big enough thing that I don't think anybody actually really owns it. Yeah, it's one of those things where you want as many people to feel connected to it as possible, and who actually owns it probably becomes less and less important.
So I think you've already touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the bells, but in your time at Leave No Trace, is there a method of learning that has been better received than other methods of learning? Or maybe a better question is, what's the best method of trying to get a message across that doesn't maybe turn people off?
Yeah, I mean, we all have seen our friends, and the more passionate you are about mountain biking or rock climbing or Leave No Trace, the more I think it opens you up. You become the possibility of becoming preachy creeps into all of us at some point, right? And you want to proselytize for your sport, the thing that you care about so much, that has given you so much. So, probably a pretty pointed one for the mountain bike community is the e-bike discussions. People become super worked up about it, and understandably so. I think traditional mountain biker sees this as like potentially the unraveling of a lot of trail access that they worked hard to gain, and the e-biker, the mountain biker who is like, this is the only way that I can continue riding because my knees are shot or whatever, feels equally passionate that their activity is justified. And then we get into these moralistic wars with each other. So teaching people about our activities and doing it in a way that's humble and approachable and admits that none of us really understand every aspect of what creates sustainability and environmentally acceptable limits is super important, because like there is always going to be a ton of gray lines that we need to inspect. Climbers, developing even just a single boulder in the woods that you think has a nice climbing boulder problem potential, but how much moss are you going to peel off the top of that boulder before it's climbable? And how much are you going to improve that landing so that you're not going to break your ankle while you're trying to send the proj is a lot of gray lines to consider. Am I going to like not remove any moss? Well, then it might never become a boulder problem. Is that always the right answer? Probably not. Is that sometimes the right answer? It probably is.
I mean, you could probably almost compare that to the activity of building a trail.
Yeah, 100%. People always say, like, they used to say, like, well, I don't like machine built trails. I just want natural trails. And I would say a natural trail is called the woods, and there is no trail to ride. Like there's a degree of engineering in any trail you start to construct. There are game trails, but as soon as you start hiking them or riding them or exploring them in any fashion, you're sort of beginning the process of adapting them for human use. And then the question is, well, how wide and how much are we going to introduce some switchbacks instead of going straight up the hill? And now you're building something that's an engineered human-centric project, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. But I think you do end up asking some questions about how far you're going to go with that.
For sure. And, obviously with principle number 2, travel and camp on durable surfaces, how do we get people to appreciate the outdoors if we don't have a responsible way to get them into the outdoors, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that comes back to me to those questions of like, we've gotten so much out of these outdoor pursuits. I don't like the idea like the best way to have sustainable mountain biking or any other activity is to keep it secret. The whole like, secret crags, secret trails, secret this, secret that. I find to be self-serving and selfish because I want other people to care about the natural world, to have fun exploring the natural world, to just explore, enjoy that recreational activity for what it is, and figure out ways to share it without being too destructive.
During your time at either IMBA or at Leave No Trace, is there anything that like really surprised you or caught you off guard, or maybe went a different way than your preconceived thoughts on a topic was?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I'll bring it back to the marketing side of things, and what we talked about with like the regional directors program, Subaru of America's support for these different outdoor organizations. How do you make all of this compatible with a business model, right? And there are money interests in all of this stuff. And, marketers rightly take a lot of heat for like being the commercial aspect of outdoor sports. But that's also a super interesting question to me of like, if a Hansi Johnson is going to be equipped to create a lot of great recreational resources, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay his salary? Who's going to pay for the trail building crews that come in and execute that vision? That whole, like, there's a responsible business ethics part of what I've been doing for the last 20, 30 years that is just interesting to contemplate.
Yeah, and then you have the follow-up of that, and we don't need to go deep on this one because we could go for hours, which is the long-term maintenance and care, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's vital to all of these visions. I think and then we talked about ski resorts where it's not, in no way volunteer based. Maybe some of the patrollers are volunteer based, but they're generally looking to get compensated for the good work they're doing. So we're all trying to figure out, my career, essentially my whole adult career has been in getting paid to be involved in outdoor sports. So I'd like to think there are responsible ways to do that and that it's a net benefit for society and the natural world. But it's not always that way. We've all seen people who have exploited outdoor situations in ways that have been destructive too.
So we're going to close with two questions. One of them you may have answered in a roundabout way, but I'm going to ask it directly. If you could get trail users to change one bad habit, what would it be?
I would say, to me, the one that gets under my skin is unfriendly and elitist attitudes. And, I like to race bikes or run on trails. I don't think that competition always breeds this, but the racing group can be guilty of it. Just in general, anybody who's been, I'll go with the word jerk, to other people on the trail is something that gets under my skin. There's no reason. You can be as fast as you want of a rider, just find the appropriate place to do it and be friendly to other people who aren't as fast as you.
Yeah, that's why somebody created events.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good place to go for it. But, if you're a racer in any sport, you need to have a non-race venue to do your training and workouts. And all of that can be done in a way that's friendly and welcoming to others. And then you can find a good stretch of trail to put the hammer down and be still welcoming and friendly to other people while you're doing it.
So this last question is something that I'm asking to everybody. And if a guest has been on the show that I didn't ask him and I have him back on the show, I ask him the question then, which is, and I'm going to preface this with, I want you to answer it selfishly and in a way that you can't stay in the place that you are, which is, what are the things that you look for in a trail community? Say you had to leave Boulder for whatever reason, doesn't matter, but you had, with that came the opportunity to go anywhere else. What are the things that you would look for in a trail community that would compel you to go there?
Oh, I mean, it's vibe, right? Like, that's the thing. And it's hard to define and it sounds a little fruity, but there are communities. You were in Fayetteville. the New River Gorge. I haven't been there in quite a while, but there was a vibe when that place was being brought into existence as a climbing mecca, and people knew of each other, would see each other, even if they'd only heard the name. We're just so stoked and excited to see what was happening and how new places to climb were being discovered every year. So that kind of place, especially, I think that aspect when a place is in development and there's a lot of people making a scene and that has that that vibe is it's a pretty cool thing when you see it in existence.
That's a good answer. And that's why I want people to answer it selfishly, because some people, some people say microbrewery, some people say group rides. And I think group rides could really kind of, in a certain way, fall into that vibe, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, like a community is growing. You get the sense that it's embracing, that people are going to be supportive of each other. And that, it's funny. I'm a rower, as another sport I've pursued with a lot of passion. And it is not a big thing here in Boulder, Colorado. We have one little reservoir that I do endless laps around in my single or team boats. It's a vibe to me in a really cool way because there's only 30, 40 of us in my little rowing club. We're all volunteers. And it's got that feeling of like when you've seen a mountain community start to really take off of like, oh, wow, there's something cool here. It's not that the natural area itself is so unique and special. It's that the people there are making something happen. And I've got a little taste of that with my rowing club here in Boulder.
So in closing, we are brought together by Miles from the Outdoor Marketing Bootcamp. Is there anything you have to say about what that will offer for people?
Well, what I hope to bring is that perspective of somebody who spent basically an entire career doing marketing communications in the outdoor sports world, and how I can share my experiences in a way that somebody else might think of this as a viable career that's going to have a positive effect on the world. You can, I think, still be an outdoor recreation and be a marketer for it and do it in a way that you think, I'm really proud of how this affects other people. I'm not just in it to try to cash in, like I jokingly said before, the big bucks of outdoor sports marketing. But, I think there is a way to do all these things that you also feel like I'm inspiring people to do really rewarding outdoor activities and do it in a thoughtful fashion.
Perfect. Well, Mark, I really appreciate you carving out some time from your day for us to record this. And thank you for bringing us up to speed with some of the history around IMBA and what Leave No Trace actually means. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you've heard, please take the time to share these shows with others. Sharing these shows will help create awareness of both the guests who have taken the time to be on the show and the podcast series itself. Also, if you're new to the Trail Effect Podcast, check out our ever-expanding library of episodes. If you listen to the Trail Effect Podcast on Apple or Spotify, please don't forget to leave a rating and review, as this is one of the best ways to show our support for the Trail Effect Podcast. For additional ways to help support the Trail Effect Podcast, check out the affiliate links tab at the Trail Effect website, where you'll find links to Kettle Mountain apparel and Trail One components. By using the affiliate links found at www.traileffectpodcast.com, a small commission will come back to the podcast, which will help keep this thing going. This podcast has been edited and produced by Evolution Trail Services. Thank you again for listening.